Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 35th audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble Channel series. I am the Q News Patriot, coming to you again today with Dr. Kirk Elliott from Kirk Elliott Precious Metals. My name is SG Anon. Prior to our conversation today, Dr. Elliott and I had some strategic discussions about how we would talk about the geopolitical events in the world and where we would try to concentrate our focus, because we try to bring the most relevant, pertinent, correlative information that we can glean from what's happening in the world to support not only the idea of this worldwide financial shift, this change that seems to be inevitable and is coming, and I think everyone intuitively understands that, and also the patterns throughout history that have seen these types of shifts and how we can respond to those in real time, insulating ourselves, protecting ourselves, and also educating ourselves to prevent these types of manipulations from ever happening again. We have a tremendous amount changing right now in the world. The finance space is certainly no exception of that. And we now have the rhetoric entering into the public narrative space just over the last few weeks, discussing the precious metals sector and other commodity sectors, baffling analysts, the expected collapse of the debt bubbles within the NATO Western world, and particularly, North American financial markets, among many other things. Without further ado, Dr. Elliott, thank you very much for joining us today to help break some of this down.
It's my pleasure. It's always great to be with you, SG.
I thought today we would talk a little bit about where we've come and where I think we can contrive ourselves to be going from this, and sort of conclude our call with the discussion of the current geopolitical landscape and things to expect here in the near future, because that the purpose of these audio chats is to try and give patriots not only the educational context but some actionable information they can use in the here and now. And I want to take us back a little bit, actually, if I could, to the fall of Rome. In this particular period of time we're living in, we're essentially watching the empire of the three cities collapse. The Roman Empire, of course, heavily involved in its own demise and its own destruction with the intentional debasement of its own currency, the silver denarius. And of course, that led to the same sorts of situations we're seeing right now in the Western world. Very pinching inflation, even hyperinflation in some arenas. It led to a breakdown, of course, of the moral society, the ethics of society. And eventually the empire itself was overcome through foreign invader involvement within the Roman society, particularly within the Roman legions. And that seems to be a convergence of the same flavors of things that we're seeing in the world now. So before we get into the current world events, do you mind to give us, to the best extent that you're able to, maybe a little bit of an educational backdrop on why the patterns we're seeing now look so much like the patterns we've seen over the last, say, 500 to 900 years?
Yeah, I mean, a couple thousand years, actually. So you go back to 56 BC, there was this guy who was running for the office of tribunal in the Roman Republic. That'd be like a governor. His name is Clodius. So possibly the most important politician that's ever lived. It's like, what? Who's Clodius? And why would you say he's the most important one that's ever lived? Well, he did something that modern day politicians mimic even today, a couple thousand years later. And that is, he was running for this office. And what did he do? He offered people free grain for their votes. It's like, oh, okay, that's where it started, right? Whether it's free health phone or welfare payments or stimulus or you name it, politicians always give away other people's money in exchange for votes, right? So he started it. So you start this cycle going, and then the kind of the fateful path that Rome went down, you look at how big they were and how great that republic was and how much territory it spanned. And yet they didn't really lose because of foreign invaders. They lost because of the weight of their entitlements, right? They crumbled from within, from moral decay, from ethical decay. And so this like growing legion of populace that was acting like parasites on the government treasury, right? I mean, that's sort of what happened. So when Rome fell, 1/3 of all citizens of Rome were getting public assistance at the time. They crumbled from the weight of that. So we have to ask ourselves this: well, where's the United States compared to Rome if we want to parallel, right? So today, if you go to US, whitehouse.gov and pull up the federal budget, so the federal budget for this year that Biden just came out with, it's disgusting. 7.5 trillion. I mean, it's like, oh, dude, what are you thinking? Right? Because how much money do we bring in? Probably like 4.8 trillion. So automatically we're actually going into 2.8 to $3 trillion worth of debt. And they think that this is okay. It's like, yeah, this is what our budget is, but we still have a printing press. Let's just print our way out of it, right? So, but you look at where we are today, this year's budget. Everybody go to that website, whitehouse.gov, and look up the budget. So when you add up Social Security, Medicare, women, infant, children programs, food stamps, and Social Security is not an entitlement. It's a mandatory payment. People pay into it their whole life, right? And so if you go like all the way to the end to even like it's summary table S3, I believe is what it is. But you can look at the sum of all the expenditures. Well, you add up the mandatory payments, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, women, infant, children programs. Let's see, is that? Nope, we'll go down a little bit more where it actually starts to go through Social Security, Medicaid, and all of those here, that page right there. So check this out. This is amazing. So look at 2024. We bring in, we spend $6.8 trillion a year. You go down to total receipts, just a little bit farther down the column, $4.96 trillion. So it's like, whoa, that's almost $2 trillion deficit. But here's the thing. You see on there, we're bringing in 4.9 trillion, but you look at the total of the mandatory programs up above, which is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, other mandatory programs like food stamps, women, infant, children programs. That's $4.1 trillion in handouts and entitlements of the 4.9 we bring in. Literally, it's about 80% of everything that we bring in as a country goes out towards stimulus and mandatory payments. Rome fell when 1/3 of the population was getting that kind of stuff. We're at 80%. But now you add on the interest-only payments of our national debt, which is that next line down there. It's $800 billion a year in interest-only payments this year. What about when interest rates continue to rise, when the debt continues to rise? We're at over 100%, SG, of everything we bring in as a nation is for handouts, entitlements, mandatory payments like Social Security, and interest-only payments. Over 100%. That doesn't even include Department of Defense, Department of Education, infrastructure, all of that stuff that it takes to run a country. We're not even including that yet. We're just talking about handouts, mandatory payments, entitlements, and interest payments as more than 100% of what we bring in. SG, we are toast. And next year, it gets even worse because they're spending money like drunken sailors. So this is where, when the denarius fell, they started eroding it, right? It was a silver coin at the time, and they started taking like a little chisel or whatever and knife and carving edges off of it and getting these little shavings, making a new coin. That was their version of inflation, right? They would keep making this coin smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, people were smart. Back in the day, it's like, wait a second, this should be the size of a quarter. It's the size of a dime. What happened to this? What happened to this thing, right? Well, that's why they put ridges on the outside of quarters, right? So people wouldn't shave the edges off of them. It's this old modern day relic kind of a thing. Well, we don't have coins that people shave the edges off anymore. But what do we have? Printing press does the exact same thing, where they can just print money out of thin air. That debases the currency as well. So modern day version of the Roman denarius losing value is just the printing press. And it's way easier. And now moving forward, to central bank digital currency that most nations around the world are wanting to bring to the table, it makes it even easier. Because to create inflation with paper currency, you have to cut down the tree, you have to make the paper, put cotton in it, whatever, and then you flatten it out, you put it through the printing press, put ink on it, cut it, wrap a band around it, and send it to the banks. Well, that's a process. So to do $1 trillion of that takes a while. To do $1 trillion of digital money, it's really easy. You just find some nerd at the Treasury Department who presses the zero a bunch of times on the money supply, hit enter. It's like, I just created $1 trillion worth of inflation. It took me half a second, right? I mean, that's how easy it's going to be moving forward. But central bank digital currency isn't about fixing a broken system. It's all about people control. It's all about defining and determining what you spend your money on, with whom, where, when, and how much, and their ability to cut you off from buying or selling if your ideology doesn't match up with theirs. That's what this is all about. It's all about people control. It has nothing to do with fixing a broken system, because our system is so broke that it's no different than the Roman Republic that we started this conversation about. It's just bigger, right? But here's the thing.
Incredible.
Any rational person would not want what they have. Would you want a central bank digital currency that says, hey, SG, we know who you are. We know where your bank accounts are. We know what your spending habits are, and we're going to cut you off from buying or selling if your ideology doesn't match up with ours. I don't care if you're on the left. I don't care if you're on the right. Nobody would want that. But if you cause everything to collapse and people can't afford to feed their babies, they can't afford to pay their rent or their mortgage, and people will give up their freedoms, SG, in exchange for perceived security and peace. And this is exactly what if you break it bad enough, they will want what you have coming. And that's how I see this playing out.
So I've just got to ask you then, and I appreciate the historic and the longitudinal, understanding of this, because it's so important to realize that when Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun, that's a very literal statement. I think we would all do very well to internalize. Many of these things that are happening in the world right now have been done, have been refined even and perfected multiple times in the past. Everything from bioterrorism to manipulation of the finance and business space to manipulation of governments. Going back to the individual Meyer Amschel Rothschild in the mid-18th century, who came out and said, "Give me control of the nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." And so these types of patterns, I think, are very important to remember, because it prevents us from forgetting them again, right? Through the control of information, through the control of the printing press, through the control of the censorship machine over the last 1,000-year period. Many of these events have spawned off in different nation states, republics, and empires throughout the world. And they've not been properly, I think, recorded into the record and taught, right? And exposed in a way that makes it all come together and coalesce. So I really appreciate that. And I want to shift from that to this idea of the transformation of world finance. Of course, we know that there's essentially, I think, two competing forces in the world, right? When it comes to the financial institutions, the layout, the structure, the framework of our financial government, our relationship to government at the finance level. And I think those two sides, if we could call it that, those two forces would be those interested in humanity's highest good, the freedom of expression, the decentralization of control, the maximizing of sovereignty in the world, and those who are on the other side, the NWO reset, the Great Reset agenda, totalitarian digital slavery, etc. And I think both sides, when we look at the changes that are happening in the world, are capitalizing also on the technological shift that is happening, in the space, within the consciousness and within our societies worldwide. We're going from a simple, what we could call maybe a more simplified digital style life into a more quantum, a more higher level, digital interface with the world. Quantum computing offers, exponential ability with various technological advancements, and that includes everything from finance to business to health and the various arenas of society that generate the economic engine. So, bearing all of this in mind, I wanted your thoughts on a few of these headlines, maybe as we go through here. These are headlines I've taken just from the last 4 to 5 days. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 or 6. I know there's looks to be 7 of them. And I find it very interesting that these headlines should be dropping at this point in time, because it's only been within the last couple of weeks that President Trump himself actually came out and said that it looks like the U.S. economy could crash, and he certainly hopes it does prior to his assuming office January of 2025, because he doesn't want to be, quote, another Herbert Hoover.
Yeah.
So these headlines, taken mostly from the Financial Times and mainstream media, because I think it's important to monitor those communications and those pathways as well, since they reach so much of the world. From the Financial Times, rich countries set for record $15.8 trillion worth of debt sales, says the OECD. China has little choice but to inject stimulus. Argentina's record bond swap aims to pave the way to end currency controls. Gold's mystery rally baffles analysts. Hong Kong stocks rise to lead gains in Asia, but the Japanese Nikkei, pardon my pronunciation on that, extends its slump for the second day. Gold rebounds on dollar retreat, and India strikes free trade deal with countries including Switzerland. And of note, India is a major powerhouse component of the BRICS alliance. So after hearing that constellation, Dr. Kirk, can you give me a sort of a summarized, a Reader's Digest impression of how you would read that?
Yeah, I mean, when you've got debt sales, that's code for countries are running out of money, right? And so like the United States, for example, we sell treasuries, and normally other countries buy them. Well, nobody wants them anymore. I mean, literally, they go to auction, and you hear this bragging moment. It's like US 30-year treasuries went to auction. It was 100% successful. They sold the whole issuance, and people cheer. It's like, see, the US dollar, it's still, people still want it. It's like, who's the buyer? Who is the buyer? You know who the buyer is? The Fed. The Fed's always the buyer of last resort, which they're using money that's printed out of thin air to buy US treasuries, which creates our inflation. See, at CPAC a few weeks ago, the president of El Salvador talked about this. It's such a great speech. It was so simple to a group of people who normally don't hear this kind of talk, right? It's like they're normally in that CPAC group, people are thinking, oh, the dollar's strong, America's great, this is going to be fantastic, blah, 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 we can always win. It's like, that's not always the case. Look, I'm an American, I want a strong dollar. I do. But we have a regime that actually prints money like there's no tomorrow, devalues our currency. So this is what he said, and it points exactly to your headlines, which is, why does America have such high taxes? You know, why? Because they still have a printing press, and they can just print their way out of it like they do with everything else. So he said taxes are an illusion. Taxes are the illusion. Then they want higher taxes to try to trick people into thinking, hey, we need higher taxes to pay for all this stuff. It's not taxes that pay for all of our stuff. It's printing of money. So therefore, we've got this double whammy of higher taxes, reducing people's bottom line. They're printing money to fund everything, which actually makes everything more expensive. So reduced bottom line with more expensive stuff, that makes our economy really bad. And he said the rest of the world has already figured this out. That's why they don't want US treasuries anymore. So the Fed is the buyer of last resort. All these other countries that you mentioned, selling their debt to make ends meet. What if there's no buyers? What if the world figures out that Venezuelan debt is garbage? What if they figure out that Russian debt is garbage or US debt is garbage? Well, then they're simply not going to pay them. Then what? This is what happened after World War I with Weimar Republic Germany. They abandoned the gold standard, printed money like there was no tomorrow, had well over, might have been 1 billion% inflation. I mean, it was insane. They had to pay people in twice a day with wheelbarrows full of cash, so the loaf of bread didn't double in price between lunch and dinner. They couldn't afford to feed their babies. What came next? Hitler. I'm telling you, when people can't afford to feed their families and you have a hyperinflationary scenario, people will give away their freedoms and vote for anybody who promises them anything from the government treasury. So what did Hitler do? He came in and said, hey, everyone, I'm campaigning on this promise of hope and change. This is my promise to you. Vote for me and I'll fix it. They willingly put in office the worst dictator in the history of the world, right? And it's like, dang, He didn't even have to hold a gun to people's heads. People willingly put him in because he promised stuff. See, this is where I fear Americans that are not awakened to the reality of the world we're living in are going to start giving away their freedoms in exchange for perceived security and peace. Doesn't even have to be real. Like all these other countries that are selling their debt, trying to make ends meet, the same thing is going to happen there. Because this year, it's not just the United States that's going to the polls. 60% of the world's population is voting for a new government this year. 60%. What a great time for crisis and to usher in a new central bank digital currency at countries all over the planet, to usher in a new monetary system that's all about people control. I mean, sadly, when I start to connect the dots, this is what I see, because no rational person would want that. And these politicians, these bankers, these Federal Reserve people, they're not stupid. They're not stupid. People always tell me, it's like, they're so dumb. The Biden administration is so dumb. It's like, no, they're not. They're pretty effective at what they've been doing. They're evil. There's a difference between being evil and being dumb, right? And so this is where I see us headed, is this globalist agenda manifesting itself over the next 9 months before the election. And that to me should have alarm bells going off in everybody's heads.
You know, I appreciate you bringing that to the attention here, because we're talking about the prime opportunity for those very forces we were referencing a moment ago. Like, this would be the moment, if we want to call it that, the end of the ninth inning in the game, where someone's going to have to make a move, right? We know categorically, for example, that there are digital finance systems being trial run in the BRICS nations and in other nations around the world. We have the Quantum Act here in the United States that hasn't really fully fleshed itself out, but provided the legal basis in U.S. code for transformation of our society to a more hyper advanced computing style lifestyle. And I think that's the argument here, or the discussion rather, is maybe a better way to put it, is as we walk through this, as we the people, we're now conscious of these events that are happening, right? It's no different than if we were having a conversation, say the very end of the year 1928, early into 1929, about where we might be headed, and to what end the various monetary policy and fiscal management policy of not only the U.S. but the world may actually end up, right? And I think that's just so critically important. I thank you for bringing that to everybody's attention. Now, for those out there that haven't seen us on air before, have not heard you speak, maybe they're hearing this type of a broadcast for the first time, it's not a secret, I think, that you all out there are, and you yourself personally, are heavily involved spiritually, heavily influenced by your faith. As we walk through life and we see these events unfolding, we know that the Bank of International Settlements is actually constructed to look in almost a mirror image form to the old drawings and artist renditions of what was the Tower of Babel. We know that the Rothschild banking dynasty has had, essentially a complete monopoly on U.S. monetary policy and supply, and monetary supply of the Western world, really, for the last couple of 100 years. And we know that something has to break, right? Now that we've awakened to these realities, now that people are finding broadcasts like this, something has to break. So for those out there who have not had a chance to hear from you how you would deal with this stuff, how you are dealing with these types of things in the world, I thought maybe, if you don't mind, I would ask, the measures that you would recommend for people to take, obviously, based on where they're at, meeting them where they're at within their capabilities, and also maybe share a little bit about your own personal difficulties and what you've done to navigate, without divulging, sensitive financials, what you've done to navigate this very unusual period of what seems like globally designed monetary collapse.
Boy, I mean, it's a loaded question, but it's an easy answer, right? So when you look at this stuff, when you look at the billionaires dumping their shares of stocks, the Walton family, getting rid of $4.5 billion share of their own company, Bezos getting rid of $10.5 billion worth of Amazon, Bill Gates, not even being the largest shareholder in Microsoft, but he's owning land. He didn't sell any of his land. You've got Jamie Dimon at Chase selling $150 million of his own shares. What are they saying? They're saying, we're basically narcissists, and we think that we're great. Our companies are great. We can jump over any hurdle in life. but we can't jump over this one. This economy is a bad one, right? So we're just going to get out of Dodge right now, right? And so they're getting out of the paper assets. Zuckerberg at Meta got rid of $500 million worth of Meta shares. And then what? Well, he's building a bunker, the Taj Mahal of bunkers under his house, and he's buying gold. So I look at this stuff and I look at central banks around the world allocating into thousands or hundreds of tons of gold. And I think, man, this is awesome. Because they're showing us what they know is actually the truth and what's going to be real. And we should do the same thing. So it's really as simple as that. It's like all these big globalists and all these things are protecting their backside. They're allocating into tangible assets. They're getting out of paper. They know what's coming. We should do the same thing. We don't have to do it in thousands of tons or even tons. We can do it by the ounce and do the same thing that they're doing with whatever means that we have to protect and preserve everything we've worked so hard to accumulate. To beat them at their own game, you have to get out of the system. You have to get out. So that's what I would say. We do the same thing. We get out of paper, we get out of digital, we allocate into strength, into tangible assets, and just go from there.
And how has that process, if you don't mind my asking, how has that affected, your own personal walk, your own personal journey? And if you don't mind, I'm going to get a little bit personal here. How has that affected your understanding, say, over the last 3 to 5 years of the world monetary system versus your career prior?
Boy, well, my career prior, I way back in the day, late 90s, this is a while back, hence my gray beard, right? I worked for ING, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, all that stuff, right? But here's where even back then, they said, Kirk, you can't even recommend physical gold or silver to your clients. We didn't sell them. We didn't offer them. So I'd recommend that they go somewhere else to buy them. They didn't even like that. They said, you're selling away. It's like, what? I'm not selling anything. I'm just telling them to go someplace else because we don't offer it, right? So at that point, I determined, all right, God's my provider, not them. I'm always going to do what's best for the client. And we just move forward with what I did. I quit. Right. And so then I got into the precious metals world back in 2002. I got rid of those licenses that were holding me back, because the same is true today. Your normal advisor, your brokers, they can't recommend something that they don't sell, or else they could lose their job. It's a law called selling away, or ruling. It's not a law. It's a rule. Right? So human preservation, self-interest. It's like, I want to keep my job, right? So, and I'm not saying anything bad about them. They might be great people, smart people. They have great hearts, but they want to keep their jobs. For me, I was just different. I'm just built a little bit different. It's like, you know what? God's my provider. Man never is. I'm always going to do what's best. So I left so I could focus completely independently on offering people what is best for their situation. Right now, at this time in history, it happens to be precious metals. And I wouldn't even do gold right now. I would do silver, because silver's outperforming. It's doing so much better. It's not paper. If you want to get out of the Bank for International Settlements unified ledger, you want to get out of their beneficial ownership, where you give up your ownership of your checking account, your savings account, to the bank so they can use your assets as collateral to pay off debt, and you become a beneficiary of your own funds, that means you don't own it anymore. It's like, I don't want that. Nobody wants that. So allocate into something that you do own completely, that is completely transportable. It's portable, it's transparent, it's accountable, it's getting out of the system, and it's growing. It's like, what else could you ask for? So when I put it all together, and so I got a PhD in this stuff, right? But I look at this and it's like, we are at the end of a monetary system as we know it. It's this pendulum shifting moment where we're moving away from the era of central banks that are fiat driven into a money system that they want, a central bank digital currency that's all about people control. There's a parallel reality starting, and that is money that's backed by gold. See, this is why I can still have a smile on my face. Everything we talked about means that they're actually eroding our freedoms, but it doesn't mean that they're going to win. because I think even states are starting to pull together state chartered central banks backed by gold to oppose the federal-based system, right? And using gold or silver as barter. This is a parallel economy that's being established that now we can take advantage of and thrive and maintain our privacy and freedom.
I apologize. I had an audio interruption there on
Oh,
this
that's
end,
no worries.
but retain our freedom was the last that I heard. And sort of piggybacking off of that, you were talking a moment ago about silver and about how that certainly seems to be something that has the attention not just of the individual retail investor space, but also, you know, organizational spaces, you know, very significant nation state power players in the world. And so I just wanted to pull up something published 12 March from the Silver Institute. The Silver Institute being, I believe, a project of the U.S. Department of Defense or connected to the U.S. Department of Defense. And we have a number of significant transnational financial organizations that have joined up with the Silver Institute. If you don't mind, Dr. Kirk, being that you have a significant background in these arenas, can you offer any commentary on how significant something like this is? I mean, these look to be very, very large companies.
Yeah. Massive companies. So the Silver Institute, to give you a little background on it, I've been working a lot lately with the Wall Street Silver Group. Remember Wall Street Bets? A couple years ago, they took it to the hedge funds and created the short squeeze with GameStop, AMC Theaters, and on that Reddit channel. So they created that short squeeze. So much social media momentum. It was amazing. So here's where I've been doing some research, and there's some of the best researchers in the world in silver. Well, they're exposing the Silver Institute for what they are, which is price manipulators. So this is interesting. So you go back to the Manhattan Project, in the 40s when they developed the atomic bomb. And the Silver Institute sounds all academic and scholarly and like it's marketing arm for silver, right? So who controls the Silver Institute? The Department of Defense, aerospace industry, the Fed, and the US Treasury. It's like, So let me ask this simple question. If you wanted to eat a hamburger every single day, SG, every day, no breaks, would you want the price of meat to be low or high?
Low.
Low. Yeah, you don't want to pay a lot for your burger, right? So now, if the Silver Institute was put together by the Department of Defense, and defense and aerospace are the largest consumers of silver on the planet, think that it would be notable to think that they would want silver at lower prices. So since 1944, there's been manipulation in the markets, right? Because they're wanting to pretend that silver is this, they're promoting it and you got all these purposes, but somehow, some way they're manipulating the price and keeping it low because the defense industry needs it for torpedoes, for missiles, for batteries that have equal power distribution that don't get eroded because of salt water, like lithium ion. Remember when that ship started on fire with all the electric vehicles on it? It's because the salt water integrated with the lithium ion batteries in the cars and they all blew up, right? So there's so much industrial defense basically needs for silver that for decades, like 80 years now, they've been keeping the price low. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, keeping it low because of the emergence of the silver ETF and then wanting to buy physical silver to back that ETF. See, this is some crazy stuff. So you look at what their purpose is and who controls them. And now what is the people at Wall Street Silver done? They're creating a manifesto of CEOs and companies in the mining industry, basically acknowledging that they know that there's been manipulation on price by this institute that's controlled by government institutions. Well, that's price manipulation at the core, right? That's not legal, right? So I think the manipulation is going to be exposed. And it's not like silver has done poorly with manipulation. It was $4.50 back in 2000. It was $11.91 3.5 years ago. It was $17.97 an ounce about 15 months ago. Today it's 25. It's like, ooh. We've doubled in price over the last 3.5 years. We're up like 40% in the last 15 months. We're up 10% in the last 1 month. The trend is accelerating. None of those are bad returns, but imagine what it would be without manipulation. Even better. So the Silver Institute, this what we've been talking about, understates the growth of silver for political reasons. Their projections for silver for 2024 will hit a 10-year high. In 2011, silver was almost $50 an ounce. It's like, man, we're going to be approaching 50. Why? Because the demand for silver is 1.2 billion ounces for manufacturing this year. The supply is 1 billion ounces from the mines. That's a 200 million ounce shortfall. You low supply, high demand, prices go through the roof. That's amazing. Amazing.
Let me ask, I just want to be certain that I'm clarifying and that I understand, from a comprehension level, and I want the audience to understand from a comprehension level as well. What you just said, if we were going to break that down, what you just said was that the entity that has a vested interest and has been extremely successful in keeping the price of silver worldwide very low relative to its actual reflected value is now forecasting that it will be the highest price for that particular commodity that it has seen in at least a decade. Is that correct? Is that
Yeah.
what was just stated? So that would imply then some amount of a loss of control, would it not?
That would talk about a lot of control being lost. Because when manipulation exposed, just like when sin is exposed, when anything is exposed, the controlling entity loses power, right? So I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's government, if it's in business, if it's in relationship, if it's in anything, whatever is hidden, when it's exposed, they lose power. So that's what I see happening. And, we're starting to see this there. The JP Morgan Chases of the world, the Bank of America's of the world, when they issue naked shorts on silver and now they're exposed to what they're doing, they lose power. They don't have the ability to do that anymore. And so now what else loses power is when silver actually runs out, right? So when you have manufactured demand, industrial demand for silver, and it runs out and you have a 200 million ounce shortfall, you can't play paper games anymore. Because Sony, Samsung, LG, Teslas of the world that need it, and the aerospace industry and the Department of Defense, when they need it, they need it. They're not going to care if the price is 25 or 50 or 75 or $100 an ounce. They just pass that on to consumers. It's not like they're paying for it. So, but if they don't have it, they can't make their LCD TVs. They can't finish their EV cars. They can't do all the stuff. So they really don't care what the price is because it's always a pass through and it goes to the consumer. So for us to think that inflation is ending anytime real soon, nope. Don't think that way. It's not ending anytime real soon because silver is used in all forms of electronics, on circuit boards. I mean, this is a wild time that we're starting to enter into, and the inflationary pressures haven't ended. In fact, they're maintaining and they're going to grow even further.
My friend, I would even go so far as to say that we are putting the air into the balloon until the point of failure. And I have something here that I'd like to close out with today, if we could. First off, we're going to get to in just a second where people can find you, but I want to showcase here very quickly that if we, the people, play our cards right, if we understand the type of changes happening in the world, and if we participate actively in the process, I think we can have something along the lines of what I've highlighted on the screen here, which was a picture put on the U.S. Debt Clock Project as of today, actually, discussing the idea of transitioning from a debt-based financial system to a wealth-based financial system. But it does require the active participation to whatever degree and extent is possible for those of us out there in reshaping and reforming and reimagining how we exchange value and how we permit the agencies and institutions constitutionally allocated above us, or not above us, but for us, I should say, is a better way to say that, how we allow them to interface with our society and how much control we actually give them. Dr. Kirk, really quick before we close out today, where can people find you, sir?
So real simple. You can just go to KEPM.com. and /SG. And just say that, yeah, you just fill out the information. If you want silver, if you want to roll over an IRA into physical silver, you want to start protecting yourself, great place to go, right? Because it's just an online form, and one of my teams will give you a call back. Or you can simply call us if you want to try to call right now and beat people to the punch. 720-605-3900. Just say SG sent you, right? Because that's as simple as that. Online form, KEPM.com/SG, or 720-605-3900. Just say SG sent you. And you know what? The process is easy. We'll hear your goals. We'll hear your fears. We'll hear your ambitions. We'll craft a strategy moving forward using precious metals to protect, to preserve, to grow, and to thrive. So that'll start to melt away some of the financial anxiety that you're having about the world we're living in.
Thank you very much, my friend. As always, it is a pleasure having you on the show and for bringing your expertise and your longitudinal understanding about how these financial angles and how these different arenas of society work together. I think it's very valuable and beneficial for patriots out there. And thank you for the work that you're doing alongside many others to, awaken and protect humanity to the greatest degree possible as we are really faced with the opportunity, perhaps for the first time ever, to reshape our world universally with one another across nation state boundary lines and forever put to rest the idea of a debt slave system here on earth. For everyone out there, I'll be back with each of you again soon. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. If you have any questions, please see the information in the description below this video. And this is SG Anon. I'll be back with all of you very soon on the Q News Patriot. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.